Good morning, New York. So this is not a good statistic to see. This is why I said New York will never recover. It says the update here in regards to the virus. This is from December, right? It says for New York City, 92% of New York City restaurants could not afford December rent, survey reveals. And of course, this has been steadily rising over the past months. It says in June, the survey revealed it was 80% of restaurants could not afford to pay rent. By July, 83%. In August, 87%. And for October, 88%. And then by December, 92% of all restaurants in New York could not afford to pay their rent. Now, what does that mean going forward? Obviously, it looks like about every month or so, it's steadily going up 2, 3, 4%, which means that at some point, we're going to hit 100% of restaurants are not going to be able to afford their rent. And overwhelmingly, most of these small businesses, a lot of these small restaurants, etc., small businesses make up 50% of all businesses that hire employees. So, like that, the government just killed 50% of all jobs across the country. Now, this, of course, is by design. The Amazons, of course, of the world, the Walmarts are allowed to stay open. And this is the goal. The reason being is because, obviously, if you've got too many small businesses, there's going to be a little bit too much wiggle room in terms of what the government wants people to do. And so if you kill all jobs and then you subsequently make, I'd say most jobs, either big business jobs, and of course, big business and the government, they're like hand in hand, which is why people have asked, why is it that, this business over here is closed, but there's the exact same thing right there, but it's run by big business or by Hollywood, right? Just like that lady that was like, why is my outdoor dining closed? But you literally have another outdoor dining right here for Hollywood, for a Hollywood setup. And it was packed. It was packed full of people. So it had nothing to do with 6 feet, wear a mask, etc. It was just that you're not part of the club, so you get shut down. Now, at some point, when people's bellies start to hurt because they're going hungry, hopefully people will realize that as a whole, we have the power. Till then, this will continue to happen because people as a whole don't get together and unite. The result is, of course, that the government will just take over and do whatever the fuck they want, and people will comply. To the point where you even have things like this. Like, you might look at this and you might think, well, this is fantastic, so people don't get kicked out. Now, this primarily has to do with housing and how people aren't allowed to get kicked out. Now, mind you, there's a good portion of these people that are just not paying rent because they realize, I don't have to pay rent. Shit. The stock market statistics have shown this, that people are not, they're not paying rent, and they're not using, they're using like their stimulus checks, and they're just basically dumping it into the market. It's one of the reasons why the market is, of course, going up. This article is from the Second. It says Housing Justice for All Coalition going door to door as hardship deadlines near. And then basically the purpose of this is to go door to door to let people know, hey, you don't have to pay rent. As long as you experience some form of hardship. Did you quit your job because you're afraid of getting the virus? Hey, no problem. Here's an unemployment check, and here's your free rent. But on the opposite side of this whole system, as yes, I understand tenants are losing jobs. Tenants are losing jobs because of what the city is doing, not because of what the business owners are doing. This is because of what the city is doing. And so as a result, many of these people aren't making enough money to pay their rent. Of course, they're walking around going, cancel rent. On the flip side of that is another small business owner who owns that apartment, who owns that house that you're renting from. But the government didn't say it's okay for you not to pay the mortgage. They didn't say it's okay for you as the owner of that little building to not pay the light or to not pay the water. You still got to pay. And if you don't pay, the government going to come collect. And that's the point. What a lot of people are not paying attention to is that we're slowly seeing the fruition of the rise of communism, where government and big business go hand in hand, which is just straight fascism. And as a result of that, we're seeing communistic ideals literally before our eyes unfolding. Now, this is even to the point where you even see stupid stuff like this. This is from February 15th. As a surge in cases at the University of Berkeley have prompted school officials to extend yet another lockdown on about 2,000 students living in residence halls and have banned outdoor exercise. What? That doesn't make any sense. As a nurse, overwhelmingly the people who are impacted, if all of these people were actually sick, the people who are typically heavily impacted are those who live sedentary lives, who are obese, diabetic, high cholesterol, hypertension, high blood pressure. These are the people who are typically impacted. And so it makes absolutely no sense from a health standpoint for them to ban things like outdoor exercise. Exercise improves your immunity. And this is the point, which is where I said where the government is literally the driving force for what is going on. At some point, people got to realize this ain't going to end well. Well, you want a little statistics. This is according to Small Biz Trends. It says small businesses employ roughly 60 million people, at least back in 2019. Small businesses employ roughly 47.3% of the U.S. private force on a percentage basis. Because the private workforce excludes government workforce, right? That is a huge portion of people who, one, are going to lose their business. Two, is a huge number of people who are going to lose their jobs. And what's going to happen is what I said before. You're going to get guys like Andrew Yang, right? Now, Andrew Yang is a politician. He's an entrepreneur, right? He's an entrepreneur, a philanthropist who is he's running a Democrat. He's running for New York. And if you actually pay attention to a lot of what he tweets, it's socialism, straight socialism, right? Because everybody's going to get a little check because there aren't any jobs, right? And there are not going to be any jobs because the government is trying to basically crush small businesses, right? As in the individual and the individual ownership. And then, of course, they're going to give you a little handout, right? I think they're going to give you like $1,000 a month or something like that. The reason being is because we live in a consumer economy, right? The only way that the economy basically is able to continue to function is if you consume, right? So they can't just have you go off and live off the land. That doesn't work for them in terms of how the economy works. But in terms of indebting you, right? Because that's all that dollars are, right? They just print the dollar, which is a form of debt, and then they give you the dollar, and then you go out and you labor, right? You labor to pay off the debt. And this is going to get worse. This is just straight slavery, right? This is just straight slavery. I mean, it's been this way for a time, but now it's like in your face, like we're letting you know that we're basically going to be an indentured servant to the upper class, which is why you're seeing the crushing of the middle class, because they just literally just want the poor and then the elite. And so that's why eventually what happens in systems like this is you have disinflation, right? So you end up sucking all the liquidity out. If you suck all the liquidity out, it goes to the top. And then eventually poor have nothing, which is why communism always leads to deaths. I think Donald Trump had said it a while back in his 2019 speech to the UN, where communism has claimed the lives of 100 million people, and it's always through poverty. Look at Venezuela, right? Venezuela is a perfect example of modern day communistic regime that basically has collapsed its country, and as a result, we will now see that exact same thing here in America. Communism is here, but it is actually on the rise, in terms of policies and what is going to be put forward. Ugh, it's like if you're actually paying attention to any of this, this is why I say if you live in a city like here in New York will never come back. People imagining that New York is going to come back, it is not. Again, when 50% of the jobs, right, and overwhelmingly, this is where a lot of people get their jobs from. They get their jobs from small businesses, restaurants, but also big businesses have left, right? You've seen things like a lot of the big banks, right, have left, like Goldman Sachs. A lot of these big businesses, even the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ is threatening to leave. And of course, that will take more jobs with them. But when it comes to like an actual takeover, right, an actual takeover, like it always reminded me of what I read like back in the days, like during, I think it was World War I or World War II, where the advancing troops, what they would do is as they gained foothold in an area, they would scorch the land, right? So that people couldn't come back to that land and utilize it for farming, because that's typically how your average citizen basically got their food independently from the land. And so what they would do is they would scorch the land, and they'd scorch the land so that if you tried to come back, there was nothing to come back to. And that's basically what's going on now, but it's mentally. They mentally scorch the land with propaganda so that people flee, for example, from California into these other surrounding areas. And then that whole land, because no one wants to go back, right? Once you've left, right? A lot of the businesses that have left New York are not going to come back to New York after experiencing the freedom that they have, like in Florida or in Texas, right? Or in many of these other states where they're Republican, where they experience more freedom. So, and that's the point, because it mentally gets people to think, I don't want to go back. There's nothing to go back to. There's nothing productive to go back to. And this is a mistake that many Americans unfortunately have made, is that instead of fighting in their local areas to basically usurp the government and bring about something better, and in essence, they're just falling back, falling back, falling back. At some point, nothing left to fall back to. And that's when either the vice gets stronger or the people realize that they've got to make a choice to fight for their freedom or just become servants, become slaves. That is the result of this whole pandemic. That's why you keep seeing businesses get closed for no reason. Why freaking Cuomo's like, hey, we got to open everything back up, or we're not going to have everything, we're not going to have anything to open up to. And they're like, all right, you can have 25% capacity. And you're like, what the fuck am I going to do with 25% capacity? Typically, most small businesses need like 80% just to stay open, just to break even. Many of these small businesses, aren't making money hand over fist. But that's the point. It's to make it so that there's no jobs, that people can't be independent. They can't independently earn a living outside of what the government is basically willing to give you. And at that point, you become a slave to the government.